All right, so we're diving into the British Empire this time, specifically how they ended up ruling over India for centuries.
It's a fascinating story, really.
Yeah, you wanted to know, and it's not just about like memorizing dates and battles.
Right.
We're talking about a trading company, right?
Yeah.
The British East India Company.
Hmm.
And somehow they end up as this major imperial power.
You got it. And that's the thing. When people think of empires, it's all about conquest, right? Armies, battles, that kind of thing. But the British in India,
Way more complicated.
way more. Economics plays a huge part. And then you've got the internal politics within India itself.
Alliances changing.
Exactly. Local rulers. They were making some very calculated moves. It wasn't just about the British imposing their will.
Okay, so rewind to the 1600s, right?
Okay.
British East India Company shows up. Their goal, at least initially, pretty straightforward. They want in on the good stuff. Textiles, spices, all that. They saw what India had to offer and were like, we want a piece of that action.
Yeah, basically a giant business venture.
Makes sense.
And it was a time when the Mughal Empire, which was the big power in India then, was at its peak.
Yeah.
So the company gets permission. They set up these little trading posts.
Little being the operative word.
Okay, so maybe not for long.
Yeah, because these trading posts, they weren't exactly staying humble for long, right? They start looking more like, well, forts.
Right.
Heavily fortified. And sure, the company's line was all, oh, it's just for protection, got to protect those spices. But at the same time, this is when the Mughal Empire is showing some cracks.
Interesting point. The timing is definitely suspicious.
Yeah. So was this them, seeing the writing on the wall, knowing the Mughals were weakening and thinking, time to grab some power for ourselves?
Wouldn't be the most shocking thing, would it?
Yeah.
They were smart cookies, the company. And remember, India wasn't like one big country back then. There was tons of different kingdoms, all kind of
vying for power.
Exactly.
A recipe for opportunity if you're the British East India Company.
Yeah.
So they were cool with just stepping in and using that to their advantage.
More than cool with it. They actually got really good at playing both sides. They'd make alliances with local rulers, even started recruiting Indian soldiers.
These are the sepoys, right? I've heard that term before.
Bingo.
And those sepoys, they become what, like the company's muscle?
Basically.
Yeah.
They saw how skilled these soldiers were, often from warrior castes, and were like, all right, let's make them part of our plan. So the sepoys become a major part of the company's growing military power.
Okay, but even having a big army, that doesn't automatically equal empire, does it? It's not just about showing up with guns blazing.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah. So how does the British East India Company go from, hey, we're just here for the spices, to actually controlling parts of India?
It's all about that fragmented India we talked about. See, they realized their army wasn't just for defense. It could influence those local power struggles we mentioned.
So it's less about conquering everything at once.
Yeah.
And more about, what, picking their battles.
Exactly. Back the right horse in a local conflict, suddenly you're negotiating treaties, getting favorable terms. They weren't, officially governing everywhere. But behind the scenes,
They were pulling the strings.
like master puppeteers.
Yeah.
And so this trading company, maybe accidentally, maybe not, they're on their way to being an empire themselves.
And here I thought it was all about tea.
There's a whole lot more to it than that. Plus, there's another player we need to bring in. Remember the French East India Company?
Oh, yeah. Things are about to get interesting. Can't have a good story without a little competition.
And trust me, this is a rivalry for the history books.
Yeah.
This wasn't some friendly who can sell the most spices kind of competition either.
Not with these two.
Nope, we're talking full-blown global rivalry.
So when these two nations go to war back in Europe, that probably doesn't stay in Europe.
Good guess. Those conflicts.
Oh.
They spilled right over into the colonies, India included. You've got British and French East India companies essentially fighting a proxy war using their sepoy armies.
So it's not just about dealing with Indian politics. Now they've got European conflicts thrown into the mix. Talk about a complicated situation.
That's an understatement. And it really makes you wonder about the local rulers caught in the crossfire. Talk about pressure.
Some probably saw an opportunity, right?
Oh, absolutely. The British were offering a powerful alliance, a way to consolidate their own power. But others, they weren't fooled. They knew the company was getting too powerful, too disrespectful of Indian traditions. It was a balancing act for everyone involved.
It sounds like the British were masters of playing the long game. They knew how to make themselves seem like the best option, even when it benefited them the most. It's giving soft power vibes.
100%.
Yeah.
Early success in India. It wasn't just about their military might. It was about diplomacy, building those strategic alliances. They were masters of influence, recognizing that sometimes the best way to gain power is to become the power behind the throne.
Okay, so we've got a trading company with their own army playing all sides of Indian politics like a fiddle and fighting a proxy war with the French. Where does it go from here?
Oh, things are about to get really interesting.
Mm.
Let's jump into the 1700s. By this point, the British East India Company, they're a major force in India. I mean, they're minting their own coins, collecting taxes. They've even got their own legal systems up and running in some areas.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. We're talking about a company, not a government, right?
Exactly.
And they've got this much power. Feels like a recipe for disaster.
And, well, things were definitely starting to bubble over. See, the company, they were all about profit, right? And that came at a price for the people in India. Heavy taxes, farmers being exploited, corruption was rampant.
It's important to remember their loyalty was to their shareholders, not necessarily the people they were, well, governing.
Not exactly the most benevolent rulers, so I'm guessing this didn't exactly make them popular. Yeah, you could say that again. There was a lot of resentment building up, and it all came to a head in 1857 with the Sepoy Mutiny.
Ah, yeah, the Sepoy Mutiny. I remember learning a bit about it in school, but it's been a while. What was the trigger? What set it all off?
It started with a rumor, actually. Word spread among the Sepoys that the new rifle cartridges, the ones they had to bite open to load, they were greased with animal fat, cow and pig fat, to be precise.
And that was problematic, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, massively. For Hindu Sepoys, cows are sacred, and for Muslim Sepoys, pigs are completely off limits. So biting into a cartridge greased with that, absolutely unthinkable, a violation of their core religious beliefs.
It's crazy how something that seems so small could lead to such a huge uprising.
It really shows how much tension had been building beneath the surface for decades. The cartridges, they were the spark, but the fuel was all that resentment, the economic exploitation, the disregard for their beliefs. It was only a matter of time before something ignited it.
So the accidental empire, it's facing its first major crisis. What happens? How do they react?
Well, their first instinct was to try and control the situation. Downplayed the rumors, punished anyone who spoke out. But it was like trying to put out a wildfire with a bucket of water. The Sepoys revolted, and it spread like, well, wildfire across North India.
And this is where it stops being just a company problem and becomes a full-blown crisis for Britain, right?
Exactly. The British government, they couldn't ignore it anymore. The stakes were too high. It wasn't just a few disgruntled soldiers. This was a challenge to the core of British power in India.
So what do?
Troops were sent in, obviously.
Right.
They crushed the rebellion, but it was brutal, bloody on both sides. Really a dark chapter in history.
I imagine this completely changes Britain's relationship with India. There's no going back after something like this.
Absolutely. The Sepoy Mutiny, it was a turning point.
Uh-huh.
Suddenly, the East India Company, it wasn't this symbol of British success anymore. Now it was a liability, too powerful, too unstable.
So what do? Just cut their losses and leave?
Well, not quite. India was too important, strategically and economically. They couldn't just walk away. But something had to change. They realized this whole indirect rule thing wasn't working. They needed more control.
Time to get their hands dirty, basically.
Pretty much. So, in 1858, they pull the plug. The British East India Company is dissolved, and the British government takes direct control of India. The British Raj is born.
Wow. From a trading company to basically emperors, it's amazing how much changed in, a couple of centuries?
It's history for you, right? Full of surprises. Who knew that wanting to trade some spices could lead to ruling a whole subcontinent? But even though the company's gone, the story doesn't end there. What about the legacy of this whole accidental empire? How does it affect India in the long run?
So the East India Company is out, the Raj is in. Big change, right? What does this actually mean for India?
It's a huge shift. We're talking about India going from being largely controlled by, well, a company, to officially becoming a colony under the British Crown. It's a whole new ballgame with new rules, new policies, and of course it leaves its mark on India in a big way, affecting everything from their society and culture to their economy.
So on a day-to-day level, what changes for the average person in India with the company gone?
It's a mixed bag, really. I mean, there are some improvements, some modernization under the British administration. They centralize the government, build railroads, irrigation systems, they bring in new legal codes, all that. You can't deny those things had a real impact.
Yeah, like you were saying before, it's not a simple good versus bad situation.
Right, because Alongside those modernizing efforts, you've still got exploitation. India's resources are still feeding the British Empire. Local industries, they often suffer because the policies favor British interests. And then there's the whole issue of the British just disregarding Indian customs and traditions.
I bet that didn't go over too well.
Not exactly. It added fuel to the fire of resentment that was already there. And you start to see the rise of Indian nationalism during the Raj, right? People start to question why they're being ruled by a foreign power thousands of miles away. The seeds of that were sown back during company rule, but they really take root under the Raj.
It's like this whole thing, from the very first trading post to the Raj, it's a chain reaction of unintended consequences. Like, I doubt those early traders thought they'd be setting the stage for a whole empire, did they?
It's history, right? It's full of twists and turns. It makes you wonder what those early traders would think if they could see what became of their little trading company.
It just shows you how important it is to understand history, even if it happened centuries ago. Learning about the East India Company, it's not just about the past. It helped us understand power, ambition, resistance, things that are still playing out today, just on a different stage.
Exactly. It's a reminder that history is more than just names and dates. It's about understanding the choices people made, the forces that shaped those choices, and how it all connects to where we are today.
It's a story full of drama, conflict, rebellion, its ambition and exploitation, progress and setbacks, all mixed into one.
It is, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating. It's a reminder that history is never black and white. It's full of gray areas, and that's where the really interesting stuff is, right?
Absolutely. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the British East India Company. We started with some spices, and we ended up with an empire. Talk about a journey, right? We hope you enjoyed it, and remember, keep asking questions, keep learning, because the more we understand the past, the better equipped we are to navigate the present. Thanks for joining us.